Hello, everybody, and welcome back to That Milan podcast. After a tumultuous weekend, Santangelo and I are back, joined by a very special guest as well, former guest on the State of Play podcast. I think you've also been on the channel here as well. I can't remember, but I've been on yours, Elijah Newsome, at Elijah New on Twitter, and the host of the Coming Home Newcastle podcast. Elijah, how are you, bro?
All things considered, I'm fine. I live in Atlanta, well, actually, I don't live in Atlanta anymore. I live in Arizona, so my entire life is not revolving around Newcastle. So I'm doing better than my friends in Newcastle who this is everything they live. So they're all depressed.
Sounds like
yes. Yeah, well, I was just gonna say exactly, Matt. I know you were on the beach when Milan had a disgusting defeat this past weekend. I mean, I think both sides here, Newcastle and Milan, had terrible weekends that everybody just wants to throw out the door. Injuries are catching up to both sides at this point. Obviously, a massive suspension for Newcastle. But yeah, Nick Pope, I believe, is going to be out for the foreseeable future with his shoulder injury.
Yeah.
Milan basically have one center back for this game. Looks like Florenzi is going to be filling in at left back once again because Simone Kjaer can't start for this one. So it's disastrous. It's not going well. And as I'll have at the bottom right now with the ticker, we're both on 5 points. You guys are ahead because of goal differential within the group. Milan really can't score at all this Champions League campaign. So, yeah, I mean, both clubs in poor form. Elijah, I'll let you go first and want to kind of what's going down with Newcastle right now. Terrible defeat against Everton, but I mean, there's some excuses built in there for you guys, but I'm sure not many Geordies are making those. And then Santangelo, you could get into our side of things. But yeah, Newcastle, it's really the roughest stretch of the year so far, you would say, right?
Yeah, it's been among that. I think there was a glimmer of hope after the Chelsea win and drawing against PSG. I mean, that was it felt like a win that at the death became a draw, and then playing Man U and beating them. But Everton and Spurs, just that is when I think for the first time this season, you kind of saw the grind of just what you have to do when you're starting to play European football in the Prem and also maintain, cut matches and all that kind of stuff. Newcastle played 4 games in 14 days, in which 2 of those games they named 3 keepers to the bench. So that's the state of our depth right now, is that there's not even guys in the academy you feel comfortable playing. Right now we've got a 17-year-old holding his own in midfield, but outside of that, there's not a lot of faith elsewhere. And just a lot of really freak injuries, like some weird ankle stuff. 2 guys have dislocated their shoulder in Jacob Murphy and Nick Pope against Manchester United. And then 2 guys also had back fracture issues. Isak's come back now. He's fine. Callum Wilson is back in the fold. Sean Longstaff is back after both Wilson and Longstaff had missed about 5 games each or 4 or 5 games each just for weird. Callum Wilson has terrible hamstring, so that's actually pretty normal. But Sean Longstaff had a weird ankle injury that it looked even worse than it actually was. So that's kind of what it is now, is everything's catching up. There's been a lot of criticism being thrown around at certain players, but honestly, the whole team looks gassed. Dubravka's been pretty lackluster since stepping in for Nick Pope. So if there's a team you guys could score against, it seems like right now it's probably Dubravka. Because he doesn't look good, but yeah, I mean you lose 3-0 to Everton and then 4-1 to Spurs after both teams have just not been good recently. It's just not pretty at all. So that's kind of the state of Newcastle right now. Bad, a lot of injuries. It's probably not getting better until January.
Santangelo, it sounds very familiar, does it not?
It does, actually. And I was jokingly going to throw in, so you're not going to be poaching our medical staff, right? You're not going to be coming over to
doubt it.
I think Elijah, as you kind of highlighted and documented, injuries have become a theme for Newcastle, and you're starting to see the early part of the season, Newcastle really came on strong. There was a lot of optimism and excitement coming into the season with the squad they had built, getting into the Champions League for the first time in years. So obviously that excitement's there, but you start to quickly learn how many resources you do need if you're going to be able to sustain a long season. And there's no more grueling season than the Premier League season. And teams in the Premier League in England, I mean, you have all these cup competitions that creep up on you, and you're like, oh shit, we have a cup match this week, and you're like, I got to throw out a decent team for that, right? Because it's a trophy and you do want to win it. And aside from a couple clubs like a City or Liverpool or, maybe one or two, really a lot of these clubs don't have the capacity to field, a strong, capable, rotated squad that can actually win. So you kind of have to prioritize. And I think that's sort of where, Milan are in a rough spot. And, look, they've had so many injuries. The timing of the injuries has been absolutely crucial as well. Rafael Leao was on the bench versus Atalanta, but
he's expected to come back for this one.
He's expected, but there's that cautiousness with him, right? Like, because you know how one-dimensional we can be. Yes, Pulisic and some others have caught on, and we seem like we have a little bit of more dynamism this year in the attack, but a lot of the same issues persist, and we do get into those moments where it's, man, we're really missing Leao. Like, if we don't have him on the pitch, like, we really don't offer much going forward. And when you kind of combine that with the fact that defensively, as Martino highlighted, we're so thin that we're calling back players that people were shoving out the door this year, potentially Matteo Gabbia, who's on loan at Villarreal. It kind of shows you how dire the situation is for Milan. And, I think this match I really don't have any expectations, to be honest, because this has been kind of an up and down Champions League campaign for really both teams. I mean, their seasons have become pretty comparable when you look at the injuries, the timing of it, but then some really big highlights in the Champions League, and then some lowlights where you're like, man, like, this is the same team that, beat PSG and put a great performance in, and then they come in and drop a dud, and you're like, we don't know what we're getting from this Milan team. So it's going to be really interesting. And I think obviously, that's going to probably segue us into like the next topic of, well, who wants fourth, who wants third? And because I think that's kind of a, with all the injuries piling up, that kind of becomes a conversation to be had as well.
That would have been a really good segue, but we have to bring up our guy first because we can't gloss over this. So first of all, one fan base wants to sue the other, and then the other fan base is pleading for the player to return, despite realizing the fact that the situation would probably be worse if we have kept him. And that's Sandro Tonali. So we both have depth issues. Newcastle could probably do a better job to combat that next summer. I think you guys have been very conservative with your spending as best you can in the Premier League. And that's something we discussed at length. Obviously, this was probably the biggest shock move of the summer. I think I would say transfer.
Yeah, and definitely Newcastle's biggest move. That was the move that they felt that they needed to make in order to sustain Champions League success. And I mean, the other moves made were really investment pieces. They brought in two young fullbacks with pretty minimal Premier League experience, kind of banking on being able to sell them down the road. Yeah. But Tonali was like the first plug and play, like you're getting in from the jump, like you're starting first match type of player. So yeah,
and he did great. Yeah, in the first match. Pretty bad performance at San Siro for that first game of this Champions League group stage. I mean, even Newcastle, that was just more about getting that result rather than how they played in that one, because it was just all Milan that game. Couldn't finish a chance.
First Champions League game for Newcastle in 20 years. First for the majority of that squad. Like, it was always going to be a nerves match and try to get out of there with a draw.
So as far as Tonali goes, just hurting on the suspension prior to it, what were your thoughts of him? Was he living up to that billing of that high price tag, or was he slowly making his way there? I know he had some really great performances and others that were a little bit lackluster, but as experienced as he is at his age, he's still a fairly young player, and to make the switch into a new system, new manager, and an entirely new league and language, like we all know how difficult it could be. What would you rate Tonali in that first couple months prior to the suspension?
I honestly, like, given kind of like you said, the adjustment to the new system, new league, all that kind of stuff, honestly thought he was doing fine. I've learned under how, like, you have to give some of these newer players the benefit of doubt. You got to give him some patience. Like Anthony Gordon's a good example of this, where like he was largely disappointing for Newcastle last season, and he has easily been their best player this season. Now that he's like fully ingrained into the system, understands his role, understands what he's supposed to do, and you could say the same for many other players. In fact, really, there's only been a handful of signings they've made that have just immediately slotted in and done well. Like, I mean, Sven Botman's probably one of them. And, you know, Bruno Guimaraes was one of them, and Kieran Trippier. But outside of that, there has been a slight adjustment for a lot of other guys. Maybe you could throw Dan Burn into the mix, but Dan Burn's not at the same level as the other signings that they were made and didn't have the same level of expectation. So I honestly was pleased with Tonali. I thought it was one of those by the second half of the season, we'd really get to see his true potential. And it did feel like Newcastle were still trying to figure out their midfield rotation and how they wanted to play guys. And they were also at the same time missing a key offensive cog in that midfield in Joe Willock at the time. So like Tonali and Willock never played together because Willock was injured. Tonali was suspended by the time. So like you really like it was a really we never knew how Eddie Howe envisioned what that midfield looked like because he was just kind of playing who was available. And so we'll see. But I honestly still feel great about it, suspension and all. Like it is what it is. Like that happens, but we've still got him signed on for like 4 more years. So who cares?
Yeah. Last minutes on those legs. Santangelo, any final things there before we switch topics? Or
I mean, look, this is, I think when you ask the question, did he fill up to the billing? I think it's difficult to say that, right? Because I think, that to your point, all the reasons you mentioned, you need a player like that it's a completely different culture change. We've heard, when Ciro Immobile had those great seasons in Italy and then he made the move to Borussia Dortmund, how much like the language and the culture and like the adaptation to the way of doing things, kind of like you really do need to give time, not only to yourself as the player that's making that move, because we know that it takes 2 to tango. Tonali, obviously would have stayed at Milan, but when you throw the money, when you throw everything into the equation, he also says like, all right, like let's make this move. So like you also have to give yourself that patience as a player, but also from Eddie Howe's standpoint, like and how to integrate him and make sure that he becomes a Premier League player, right? Because it's one thing to play in Italy. And it's a different style of football versus in the Premier League. The demands are different, the duties, the assignments, all that stuff. And then you kind of throw in the expectation of, hey, Newcastle's returning to the Champions League. They have high ambitions to do something great and also to be a team that can, make some serious noise in the Premier League. Then, when you throw that expectation on him and the price tag on him, there really is that conversation that you have within your head as a Newcastle fan. You're probably thinking, we can give him time, but this is an 80 million signing. Like, you're expecting him to be, like, to your point, plug and play, starting games, making an impact. And it's not always like that. Very few players that we've seen in the history of football, like, ease right in. I mean, Jude Bellingham's
United have like a full 11 of them.
Yeah. Like that's like Tonali's a player that, you build with this team. And then in like 2-3 years, now he becomes more of a leader in the midfield. And now it's like, okay, he's one of the cornerstone players that, look at him at Milan, Martino, like his first season was miserable. And people were saying, do we really want to exercise the option? And then he became, a star at Milan and he became irreplaceable. So it does take time, but look, as a Tonali fan, as a Milan fan, he did some great things with us. Me and Martino for the longest time still had his jersey hanging up in the backdrop.
Yeah, had to make the switch, as you know.
Had to make the switch post-suspension, but it's a shame that we don't get to see him in these moments like this, and you kind of see what his progression could be, because I think when he does come back, it's going to be difficult to project what the rest of the season holds because he had so much time away. He was still already adjusting when he was here. So now it's one of those things where it's like next season is going to be a good kind of temperature on where he is currently at and how far along he is, with his progression.
And he, for the record, he's still able to train with the team, which Eddie Howe's mentioned a few times.
Huge,
that's huge. You can really get him integrated in the system with no pressure at all.
Yeah. I was reading Eddie has been like very happy with his training since he's been able to do so. So I mean, at least that's a good thing. Kind of build up some chemistry. Training does matter, despite what some people would like think they kind of gloss over it. Is he able to play in the Euro? I think he might be able to, right? I think his suspension is up by then, or because I think it would have been for Fagioli. I'm not 100% on that, but
no, this Tonali's doesn't expire until next August. So,
okay. So there you go. So through August, yeah. Thank God it hasn't even been on my mind because it doesn't affect my team. But what does affect our teams are Europa in 4th place. Always an interesting spot when your club kind of arrives in this situation. Still, both are alive to make it to the knockout stages. We must make that clear. In all likelihood, it's not looking great for both bloods. Unfortunately, Dortmund don't have much to play for. I haven't really checked the tiebreaker for that because I've just been so disgusted with this group. I'm not even going to be able to watch this match either. So for this, I think it really comes down to Milan to finish 4th. I think is the best scenario. This team is not going to win Europa League. I don't think it really helps them to play in Europa League outside a few dollars. I think if anything, it would actually benefit Newcastle more. And I know we talk about how many competitions you guys are in: Carbohydrate Cup, the FA Cup, and obviously the Prem. Like, there's so many different competitions for you guys. Europa would be great because I still think individual quality wise, and the January market is going to be a lot more fortuitous for you guys. I think it would be more advantageous for you to go after a trophy like that. I think there's a certain possibility that you could maybe not win it, but certainly make a deep run into it. I think your quality translates over into that. But yeah, Elijah, Europa League or 4th if you can make it to the knockout stages. What is your preference?
Man, it's really tough because I mean, I honestly, I'm kind of with you. I think 4th just because it's just less matches to deal with, to be honest. But I mean, you bring up a good point. Like, a lot of Newcastle's injuries, thankfully so far, not season-ending injuries. Like, everyone's talking about January, and I honestly don't know if Newcastle will strengthen a ton in January because every one of the guys who's been injured, besides Nick Pope, they're slated to be back by the end of January. So I think, and so I think like there's a lot of assumptions that because the injury issues are bad now, that's going to be the case going forward. But a lot of these guys are slated to return end of December, beginning of January. So we'll see what the temperature's like. And I wouldn't be surprised if Newcastle make 1, maybe 2 signings. They still care about financial fair play. And as much as Mike Ashley didn't spend with Newcastle, I think the other part that is often forgotten is like you also have to have players leaving, and Newcastle have not really done a good job of selling players. If you think about it, the only major sale they've had in the last couple of years was Alan St. Maximin this past summer for 25 mil. So like that's the other side of financial fair play that still, as much as Newcastle fans want to ignore it, like teams are going to get punished for it. It's some you'd imagine.
Well, you would think, you would
think, but
outside of Everton,
yeah. And being the new kids on the block to money, it does seem like that's what the ownership.
The magnifying glasses on you guys,
and they're like, why they don't want to risk it. They think that they'll be able to sell some players that are currently in the squad right now for a ton in the next couple of years. So all that saying, but 3rd would be I wouldn't mind 3rd, given that I think the depth is going to come back, and I do think once you get guys like Harvey Barnes, Joe Willock, Sven Botman back, like it becomes a deeper team once again, and I think that is going to be enough to get to make a decent Europa League Cup run. And I think the other thing is, like, regardless, I think Newcastle fans would rather finish 10th this season and have a trophy or of some kind than finish in a Europa League spot or a Champions League spot. I think if you really asked fans, I think that's what they'd want. Newcastle haven't won a cup since like 1955 or 1965. So like it's been a while. I mean, if we had been in the era of Twitter, if we had been really good at the same time as Spurs, we would be the Spurs of the Prem, like haven't won anything but are really good. Like Newcastle haven't won anything since like the 60s, and a lot of those fans who last saw like the cup are like dead. So I mean, it's harsh, but it's true. And so like I mean that Newcastle fans really wanted to win the EFL Cup. Like they want to win the FA Cup. And so if you were saying we have an opportunity to win Europa League, even if it's a slim chance, they're going to want to take it.
Hey, European trophy over Arsenal and Spurs is I think that's one of the most underrated chants in football. Is like champions of Europe. You'll never sing that. Is a flex. So you got a shot. And I think, but you also hold the tiebreakers over PSG. So say if
Yeah,
PSG draw, you end up winning this game. You could
yeah.
still. That's another avenue for the knockout stages. Sant'Angelo, I know you love Europa League, man.
I love the theme. The theme kind of hits, but
Yeah. So
um,
that's a no. You want Milan and
listen,
Orphan?
listen. I'll be honest with you. Like, I still have flashbacks from like some of those games we played in the Europa League, like when we had the Fossil Belly era, where we had, like Andre Silva getting a hat trick against some team I'd never heard of, and you're like, man, we're cooking. Like this team is going to win the entire Europa League. And then we came up against Arsenal. We came up against some teams, and we just didn't have it.
United. Yeah, I'm
United.
pretty sure Diallo's only goal for United is still that one that he scored, the header. And like,
Yeah. And
ridiculous.
And as I look at the Europa League, and I tweeted this out like after the previous result in the Champions League, and I was like,
Yeah.
look, we really don't have the strength in numbers. We don't have the health on our side to effectively go into this competition and be like, yeah, let's exhaust all the resources we do have that are healthy and maybe just came back for a competition that, let's be realistic, it's a grind. It's a grueling schedule.
Yeah.
A lot of these travels they're taxing. And then you look at your schedule and it's tucked away. It's like, oh, you have a Sunday game, and now it's like, oh, Thursday you have an away game against some team, and you're like, oh, they're going to play their best game. They're going to play their best squad. And now we got to then get prepared for a match that's like a must win in Serie A, which no game is safe with Milan these days.
Yeah, that's the killer with it. It's a shorter turnaround to the weekend.
It's a shorter turnaround for the weekend. And look, Martino, like we can't handle even certain teams. Like we can have the results against PSG and then drop a stinker against Udinese or Lecce. Like, and it's like,
blowing
I'm sorry,
leads.
but it's like, I'm going to quote a meme here. It's that one guy saying we don't have the capacity. Like, it's literally that. Like, we just don't. Yeah. Like, we don't. And it's not me. Like, people say, how couldn't like you root for not getting a cup, like competing in a cup? Like, it's still a cup. And I'm like, it's easy because we don't have the depth to do it. I think your situation with Newcastle is a little bit different and a little bit more unique to what we have. Is that like you're getting some guys back. If you just kind of get in there, you can make a deep run and you may be able to, if things align, you could probably win it, right? But I think if even Milan come back, like we're looking at what our defense looks like, and it's like, what are we going to play? Like some guy that we just called up from the Primavera against a team on Thursday.
Which
and
is
it's like I don't
played against Newcastle's youth side.
The people that are saying like, oh, I wouldn't mind Europa League, they're going to be the ones kicking, screaming, moaning, groaning, and bitching on Twitter as soon as like a Teo pulls up with a hamstring injury away on Thursday. Like, why'd they play him? Well, you wanted the competition. Like, you wanted us to be in this competition, and now here you go. You got what you got, right? So
the expectations are different, right? Like if Newcastle win Europa League, that's the biggest trophy in the club's history.
That's huge.
So it's different than doesn't make sense for Milan to exhaust all these resources when it's not Champions League.
And I think
it's not winning Serie A. Like,
you're right.
I also think too with even Newcastle situation, like I think it's unique in the sense that like if Milan don't finish top 4, like I think there's going to be some pretty decent change coming. I think with Newcastle's project and the kind of their vision, and I know they're very ambitious, yes, but I think playing more so the long game. Like if they didn't get in the top 4, if they finished 6th, 7th, 8th, I think they can at least can be rationalized. Like, all right, this is a slow, steady progression. This is a slow build. We got some players in there that we can build around that are pillars. Tonali Suspension, he's coming back. We can spend more. We're kind of teetering on the right path with financial fair play. And you can kind of get the building blocks in place. So you wouldn't mind saying, hey, you know what? Like, as long as we're safe and we're finishing 8th, 9th, 10th, but like, let's go for the Europa League. Milan, in my eyes, in my view, like you won't be able to sell that to fans. Oh, we're going to finish 6th or 7th, but we might win the Europa League.
The financial and sporting risks are so far greater for both of these sides. Like the sporting risk is there for both. I would say it's kind of close, but financial risk, even if Newcastle, for multiple reasons, right, they don't make it to Europa League or they don't finish top 4, you have a government backing you for money, okay? And it's nothing like me or against it, the ownership. It's just the facts.
Yeah, it's a fact.
It's facts. And then again, you have Premier League money. So whatever you do, you're staying in the Premier League. Like the newly promoted sides into the Premier League get more than the winner in Serie A. Like that's the reality of it. So Milan's risk for not reaching top 4 is far greater, and it not only financially impacts them, it impacts the sporting project because you can't support certain things if you don't have an ownership that is willing to invest more into it. That's doing the bare minimum of like, oh, we made 50 million from just qualifying. Here you go. That's your budget. Good luck winning the Champions League. Good luck increasing your wage bill and keeping your stars that are going to Newcastle.
Yeah.
Take care of our boy, please, Elijah. Anyways, sounds like fourth. Elijah's happy either way because he knows this isn't doomsday. It's doomsday for us. And who will win? Honestly, I think Newcastle is so well positioned despite everything that's been happening in the league. We know both of these sides probably put out weaker lineups or didn't have that ambition and drive to win this week because it's really on the line for both of them this Wednesday. I think with this, St. James Park, really difficult place to play. I think the atmosphere has been the most impressive out of all the English clubs. They properly know how to do a tifo. I think the bar's on the floor with that. They win.
Yeah, that's bars on the floor in the Premiership.
Yeah, but hey, it still looked great. I'm not repping you guys, please. The Geordies are crazy enough. But with that, I think you guys have played so great at St. James's Park. I don't think you've shown that you're a team that hasn't played there in 20 years in the Champions League. I think that atmosphere is really difficult, and Milan are still a very young side. Even if Rafael Leao comes back, again, he's not 100%. So this is not really a side that is that strong for Milan. Midfield, okay. Attack, it's probably going to be fully healthy. The problem is that defense. That defense, I'm sorry, is just simply not going to stop Newcastle, and they're probably going to hit them on the counter. For me, I don't see Milan winning this game. I think if Milan win and get into the Champions League, I think it's a colossal upset. I think it's one of the most shocking things that would happen this week. I think the odds are very low for this. I think ultimately Newcastle get a result. They head to Europa League and Milan finish 4th. Elijah, what do you think goes down?
Yeah, I honestly am inclined to agree in the sense of I think, like you said, Newcastle rightly kind of rolled over at a certain point against Spurs and just decided to start subbing in guys and resting guys. And we got a Matt Ritchie appearance, which is always a pleasure. But like you said, the one thing that Newcastle have been able to do this season pretty consistently is punish like defenses that haven't been at their best. Like anytime there's rotation of any point, like, or if there's just a defense that has just not been good this year, like the quality alone that they've brought in up top between Gordon and Isak and then Wilson coming in. I'm not going to say Miguel Almiron. He goes through his purple patches every now and then. And I love him to death.
Rojas, baby.
Yeah. Shout out to Roberto. I love him to death, but like I'm not considering him an attacking threat in this moment. But I mean, there's just guys who they only need 1 or 2 chances, and Isak's one of those guys. So if they can get the ball to Isak or Gordon in dangerous positions, I think that it's easy for them at home to score. And at home has not been an issue for Newcastle this season. They've just been really bad away. And all that being said, they're still somehow 7th in the Prem. So I would agree with you. I think Newcastle could get the result here, and I don't know what's going to happen in the Dortmund PSG match. So I'm not even going to try to. I'm not even going to try to guess to see it because, like you said, Dortmund have no motivation, but also like I don't really have faith in PSG. They haven't really impressed me so far in Champions League play this season. Like I don't know, especially after their last match against Newcastle. I was like, I mean, okay, like you should be able to beat Newcastle, who are heavily injured at home, and they kind of left it to the death. So,
Matt, maybe Dortmund help either side out here. Lost 2-0 against PSG. So if PSG were to win here, there's some sort of tiebreaker with that that could implicate it, but Bayern's slipping up this year, so I don't know how much they're going to actually push towards this Champions League if they're into the knockout stages. I have a feeling your expectations are low for us this match. Is that true?
How could they not be, though, Martin? Like, I'm sorry, but I think even when we have our full roster there, I mean, I keep harping back on this, but I'm going to sound like a broken record to anyone who has followed us throughout this entire season. The first 2 games, like that's where Milan are. If they do bow out and they finish 4th, that's where they're going to look back and say, like, those games because they had that first game. The first game that would have set the tone for Milan completely. You go and you get 3 points against Newcastle, who are already coming in like hungry and like, all right, we're back in the Champions League, and you say, hey, pump the brakes. We get 3 points, we bury them, and now you go into that Dortmund game where we played well. And even if you got a draw, okay, you're sitting on 4 points. Again, things could have shifted differently in that PSG game, the second one, where because that was a must-win game, now you needed to get something from that. But this team with backs against the wall, they always seem to rise to the occasion. So I'm not going to completely rule out the fact that maybe Milan get like a gritty 2-1 win away. They somehow find a way to get some goals, finish their chances like they didn't do in the first game. But then they're knowing them, they're not going to get the result they need in the other game. And they're going to be like, well, there we go. And people are going to say, yeah, but they beat Newcastle away and they did all these good things in the chain. They're a tough group, but people always look at glass half full. I look at the first game and say, you know what? The strong teams that have staying power. I mean, I even look at our cousins in Inter, right? Like prime example of a team down 3-0. They could have laid down and say Benfica's got this game. They came back, clawed, got something, and they advanced, right? Like we just don't have that mentality. We don't have that sort of hunger in us where we're going to kind of dictate and be the assertive team in a match. I see this being a match that could be a draw, could be 2-1, maybe Milan or Newcastle, but regardless, I just don't see us advancing. And of course, in typical Milan fashion, it would be Milan getting a good result, playing well, but they don't get the other one, so they finish third. Like that's kind of what I see potentially happening here, which would be killer for everybody, in my opinion.
I really just don't want that. Anyways, we're gonna wrap up here. It's late on the East Coast. Elijah doesn't miss that at all, weather-wise, time zone-wise, viewing sports-wise. Actually, probably sucks a little bit in the morning on the weekends. But
just for Prim, everything else is great. You wake up and you get to like college game day ends at freaking 9 o'clock.
But you're mountain time too, so it's really not even that bad. I think
probably mountain time, but don't forget Arizona doesn't do daylight savings. So for the first half of football season, it's like the 12 o'clock games are 9 a.m. for me because we just don't do daylight savings. Beautiful. Yeah, that's a podcast in itself. So I'm not gonna.
So
that's a crazy thing. Like, yeah, we don't do that here. Like, you just choose not to do it.
It's just this state. Like, no one else is doing that. They're just like, yeah, no, we're not doing it.
And it was like up for vote with the government. Postpone another $1 billion to my doppelganger. So, anyways, Elijah, love you, man. Always doing great work. Let the people know. I know we had it on the ticker below. Coming home Newcastle. Been on there before we discussed that Tonali transfer. And Atlanta sports, it's okay. It's not the worst.
It's not good. It's not bad. It's Atlanta sports.
I mean, it's just the Braves reverted back to like what they were in like the 90s and 2000s, like absolute gauntlet of a team in the regular season, and then what the hell was the postseason? But I can't talk much. We know my squad. So, but anyways, let the people know where they could find it.
I mean, I changed my Twitter handle because I just got bored. So it's @ElijahNew. It's on the ticker, sure. And that's new, like I knew someone. Not new as in this is new. But yeah, I mean, that Twitter account is mostly Atlanta sports. I sprinkle a little Newcastle, but I'm usually firing off tweets Newcastle related at Coming Home in UFC. Check out the site, Coming Home Newcastle. We got a lot of great guys doing some really good work. Some guys who are local, some guys who are in Spain, some guys in America. And the pod is CHN Radio. So if you're ever bored and want to hear about another team complaining about injury problems, check us out. We drop every week. So nothing crazy.
Santangelo, the usual for you, as everybody knows in the comments. In the description of the video.
Yeah, Twitter @Matt_Santangelo. I'm gonna try to get something out. It's hard when the club's doing what they're doing and playing as power as they are, and I'm trying to find something to kind of give some hope. But yeah, anything I'm working on will be shared on Twitter @Matt_Santangelo.
Yeah, don't ever say we never love the club in the tough times. We're doing a podcast at nearly 10 o'clock, all right, after a long day of work. That Milan podcast, as you guys all know, we do have a Twitter now @ThatMilanPod, as you can see on the ticker right there. And then also my personal stuff @Martino Puccio. Please like, subscribe, comment on the channel. Go like, follow Elijah's stuff as well as Matt's. We appreciate everybody's support on the audio platforms on Apple and Spotify. We've hit over 100 followers on Spotify, so thank you to everybody on there. And again, thank you for all the support on YouTube. The numbers have been incredible. The support has been incredible. And we hope to bring you more content. Elijah, best of luck to you and the Toon Squad. Hopefully, we're all not too disappointed if there's some possible scenario that comes out that way. But other than that, man, we really appreciate it. Matt, always great to talk to you too. Other than that, guys, see you next time.